What if the epicness that we sometimes spend our entire lifetime searching for exists not in spite of the boulders, but thanks to the boulder version of you, that these boulders inspire you to become? Often, when we least expect it, life thrusts us into the role of the reluctant hero or hero in our own story. How we respond in those moments can be the difference between thriving or just surviving. We believe that our story will be determined by how we dare to answer one burning question: how to choose to live. Join us as we explore the mindset shifts, innovative strategies, and captivating stories from my own life experience and those of my truly epic guests. So let's get this started. Well, happy 2025 again for some of you who are watching this. And just really want to welcome you once again to the How to Choose to Live podcast. And I am super excited to launch this with someone who you may have seen in one of the earlier episodes of the How to Choose to Live podcast. And he's back here because he is such a brilliant thinker. He has been such an integral part of my own journey. He was really my first significant coach that helped me find my own momentum, my own wings, and my own courage a lot of times. And I think even more of that, as much as I treasure that, the conversations that Jeffrey and I have are so deep and so rich and so mutually inspiring that I love sharing them with you. And so, without any further ado, here is officially a, one of the expert leadership coaches. He's based up in Canada. He's an expert on emotional intelligence and just a general amazing, epic, I should say, human being. So join me in welcoming Jeffrey. Welcome to the How to Choose to Live podcast again.
Oh, wow. Wow. Meredith, it's always wonderful to be with you. And thank you so much. Was that beautiful? I'm just wondering who that person was you're describing. I just feel this pressure now. But I'm excited to be here today.
Well, guys, if you're watching this, Jeffrey and I have, I, th- a r- I'll call it a juicy topic because that's the way I talk. But the truth is, this to me, and I think Jeffrey, you will echo this. This is one of those topics that when the lights are off and you crawl into bed and you think about the day that just has happened and you think about the days ahead, this can be the place where it comes together. So I think what Jeffrey and I really are talking about this time um, is the critical power to the point of being a superpower of self reflection, and yet how it can be so tempting to kind of skip that step because sometimes it can feel very uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's something that you think of it. It's when when do you take time to pause and just reflect? On a daily basis, it's without that reflection, then you sometimes you can just get lost in the weeds. You know?
For sure, for sure. And I think at this time of year, the beginning of 2025, there's kind of this superficial sense of what is your New Year's resolution? And that's supposed to cover the topic of self-reflection. What is it? Are you going to lose 15 pounds? Are you going to go out there and get that new job? What is it? It's all action, 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 outer game. And often the why behind the action, that inspiration, um, and it can be taking action with a certain level of blinders on. Jeffrey, before we were on camera, you shared with me like such a powerful Martin Luther King quote that I think I've heard many, many people express, particularly as we go step forward into 2025, which some people are really psyched about and some people are really afraid, and some people are somewhere in the middle just feeling really, really stuck and even out of contact or connection with who they even are anymore. Would you share that quote again?
Sure, sure. Reading off a board that I have in front of me, it reads the ultimate measure of in the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. Uh, Knowing that the time when this quote came out, like it's speaking to that larger piece of looking at where it, how do we react when we're faced with that adversity? How do we
Yeah.
respond to change in our lives? And change can be a good or bad thing, or something in between. But what is it? How are we reacting to our environment in a way that is going to be it's going to be uncomfortable. It's something that's disruptive to the normal pattern of how we normally work. And how do we respond to that in a way that's going to allow for us to gain insight and perhaps different strategies and vantage points on how we can approach going forward and learn from that as well.
Yeah, I love that. And there are so many things even that I'm hearing just in what you're saying. First of all, this statement that it is going to be uncomfortable. How often do we predispose ourselves with that expectation, saying this is going to be uncomfortable? Unspoken part of that sentence is just because it's unfamiliar. And most times when something is unfamiliar, we often mistake that physiological feeling of, oh, I'm about to dive into unfamiliarity to protection, fear, this is danger, instead of, at least as often as not, sometimes I would maybe even say more often, if you can simply take a few steps in spite of the unfamiliarity, which you have labeled fear, the unfamiliarity, when you repeat something that's unfamiliar multiple times, it starts to become more familiar. I remember when I was first taking up off-road mountain biking at the age of 50. Now, I will not necessarily recommend that for everyone, but there are different styles of off-road biking, and there's this I will lovingly call it death-defying version that is called doing technical stuff. And this is when I first was introduced to the opportunity, which being very competitive, of course, I had to master, um, of barreling down a 40-foot abyss filled with little rocks and roots, and then having to immediately use the momentum to get back the other side. I will not kid you. I was just like, whoa, the first couple times. And yet, to overcome that screaming voice inside of me that said, what are you doing? And actually do it, and then do it again, and then do it again. It got to the point where I was so, I'll call it desensitized, but I was desensitized so I could look at something that was terrifying to me a month or so, just a matter of weeks earlier, and shift the identifying word from terrifying to exhilarating. Now, all of a sudden, it was, oh my gosh, I'm going to be going on the North Abyss Trail. Let's do this. This is one of my favorite trails. And I would come off of it kind of like, Leonardo DiCaprio at the front of the boat. I am the queen of the world, right? And I think that what you've mentioned, Jeffrey, inadvertently kind of speaks a little bit to all these inner declarations, the declarations that we don't even know that we're making that define how we see ourselves. And many of us do not identify ourselves comfortably as risk takers. So if we identify any sort of change as a risk because it leads to the unknown or the unfamiliar, then we're immediately going to feel a conflict because we say that's not who I am. And so, therefore, if I create a plan B, it's going to be much more actually like a plan A 2.0. Does that resonate at all, Jeffrey?
Yeah, it does, Mary. I think it, and the fact that you actually started biking at the time in your life when you did, I applaud you for that. It's I'm not sure I would be that brave to do it, and I think it's and to what you're saying, it's there's a I think there's we have to give ourselves some leeway in regards to allow ourselves to go through acknowledge that yeah there is some fear some hesitation
Yes.
when our situation or environment changes in a way that is unfamiliar to us because we're creatures of habit and we're creatures of familiarity and so we're wired for safety and wired for that level of support and predictability and when that is disrupted, then our brain goes off with all the signals saying, "Wait, is this danger? Or I need to assess this in a way that's going to make sure that we can go proceed forward." So it's looking at it's I think it's that reflection part becomes a part of the evaluation. Did you when you finished doing your biking? How did you that first time? What was your point of reflection after you got off your bike and sat down and thought about the whole experience?
That's a great question, and it really was a breakthrough moment for me where I marveled that if my mind was so positive that that which I was considering doing could not be done without extreme devastation and disruption, possibly even death, my mind was positive. I mean, that was truth, that was fact, that was reality, that was rational thinking, that was common sense, that was everything. My mind was positive. And why? Because I had not yet had the experience of ever doing that before. And so, what I marveled at after when I could breathe again, from the terror that I had experienced from that breakthrough of doing it anyway, acting in spite of fear, there was a huge exhilaration and then tapering into awe of, oh my gosh, if first of all, my previous definition of myself could no longer stand firm. I was someone who now had done something that previously had felt impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So I could no longer, in full integrity, say that I was not capable of doing that. I have done that now, right? So if I had been so sure just minutes earlier that I was not someone who could do that and that that impossible challenge could not be done, that it was not possible, what else might I slightly be off on relative to my own potential? And so then it was kind of dissecting what what had it taken in order to break through that aside from a level of faith and trust and maybe foolhardiness. Um, but it was also a, a couple of words that you used off camera earlier, or at least one of them. It was commitment and it was courage. And it was the defiant decision to realize that as much experience as I had had in the 50 years prior to that, my experience was still limited. And even though I'd had a lot of experience, some very victorious, some the agony of defeat in those years, I had never lived this moment yet. And my definition of myself in that moment was up for grabs. So I could repeat who I had been for 50 years, or I could really say, is this a definition that serves me right now? And in that case, I decided to say, what if there's more to me than I've been giving myself credit for, or that, and it was a conversation with myself, Jeffrey. And this is what I think you and I had talked about is so important because I feel like all too often we're like the little child who falls down, skins their knee, and before they cry, they look up at everybody else's reaction to say, okay, should I be crying right now? And if everyone is looking at them, oh my God, you poor thing, are you okay? Hysteria erupts.
Yeah, yeah. It's you think you're describing some of the times when I used to when I learning how to ride a bike, or even the first time speaking, or even playing in a music ensemble way back when. And I think what's something that came up from in what you're saying, Meredith, is what was the inspiration just to pick up the mountain bike at this point in your life?
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, it was, I guess the immediate trigger was the guy that I was dating at the time dabbled in doing some off-road biking. But the truth is, I had played with it a few times in the past and just never had, known of people that I could do it with. And I'd always um, understand right after Georgetown, I spent a year in New York City, but I also spent 9 months up in Canada in your home turf. Um, Pretending that my little pickup truck with a cap on the back was an all-terrain vehicle and an RV, and really living out in the wild just to answer the question that I felt was not answered with some of the best education in the world, and that was how to choose to live. And what I didn't realize that I was intuiting at the time was that, yeah, I'd gotten a lot of kind of chiming in from the crowd of what being successful and happy and the path toward that looks like. And yet, as I looked at these people, it the byproduct didn't necessarily always look successful and happy. And I thought, okay, so somehow one has to learn what's in ourselves. So I had to discover what I like to say, not just where I was, but who I was. And those 9 months of being out in the wild held special significance and special transformation. A couple of times we did almost not make it through some of those adventures. So the mountain biking just kind of rekindled that connection with both all the nature and the world, because I feel like the world truly is our classroom. There are so many clues out there about how to choose to live, about perfection, about resilience, all kinds of things. There's so many clues out there. And yet also when you put yourself out into nature, you more often than not are often put into a scenario where life demands that you explore versions of yourself that in your comfortable, familiar little bubble, you often are not asked to explore. And I've loved that challenge. And I love, as you know, one of my, primary goals is to be able to look back feeling like I truly lived.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it sounds like that, doing the off-road biking, it was a means, a way of kind of reconnecting with those experiences you had in earlier part of your life and rediscovering the joy you had in being outdoors. And this was just another avenue or a pathway for you to experience that outdoor enjoyment at a point in your life where you felt that it was time to rediscover.
And here's another thing that probably is more significant, even that I'm just now kind of remembering and getting in touch with. And this is really important, I think, if you're watching this, listening to this, is um, there are times in our lives where we definitely have challenges in certain one specific aspect. It could be professionally, it could be our relationship, it could be our health, whatever it is. And it takes all of our self-discipline and inner game magic to be able to feel a sense of control about these things. And more often than not, quite frankly, it can feel like things are spiraling out of control, that you have no control, that, the bad guys have all the control out there. And so selecting, I'm not saying you have to, the only way to get there is death defying mountain biking, but to find something that demands that you go deep into that introspection and reacquaint yourself, reconnect, and even expand your sense of some area of yourself that you can control. And so what was interesting for me is that in order to be successful at those technical trails, I had to become what I call the sovereign of the thoughts that were going through my mind. I could not go over the lip of that drop thinking, oh my God, you're going to die. I had to demand that the only thoughts in my mind were thoughts that reinforce the sense of exhilaration. This is going to be awesome. You're going to be freaking epic. You can do this. Right. And it created the discipline, almost like going into a gym and doing the repetition in order to build this cut body. It helped me achieve a sort of sovereignty over my own inner narrative that then helped me when I would go back at that one point in the business that I had at that point. I had some real logistical and financial challenges going on. And um, it was really taking an emotional toll on me and my thoughts and my imagination of all the terrible things that could transpire as a result of that were hard to disconnect from and hard to get beyond at that point. When I could get out there and experience victory from blowing through fears there, then it was easier for me to say, wait a minute. I am not a victim or dependent on what's going on around me in order to be okay, much less be happy. Does that make sense?
It does, and I love the way you use some of the words that kind of came to mind to me. Or you talking about being that sovereign of our own thoughts, and it's it kind of speaks to what we're talking about archetypes and how we can, what who we can be to ourselves. Are you the sovereign, being that person who is can see the potential, take hold of the situation, or and another one is that I think we're familiar with as a saboteur, where we
Yeah.
can be that person where it's we, it's like why don't things work out the way I want them to, and somehow because we're going in with the expectation it's not going to work out. So somehow, some way, we can manifest that outcome just simply by how we are approaching it, our thoughts and the words that we're using, how we talk to ourselves. There are many times I think of where it's like, speaking, being called to speak in front of a group, and it would be, oh man, I'm thinking about, okay, yeah, so I'm thinking about all the things I shouldn't be doing, I can't do, and then I get up there, and what happens? It's like I end up doing them because I'm focusing on the wrong things. And so
Yeah.
it's often that it's having that inner dialogue. And then
Yeah.
you were talking about at the start about that reflection part. I think part of it's just it's giving ourselves permission just to pause and
Yes.
reflect. And that can be, it can be pre, it can be post. Oftentimes when you look at in the area of performance coaching and training, and with athletes in particular, we talk about that visualization. Visualize
Yes.
what it is that you are entering into. What's that environment going to be in terms of your own performance and performance training, and then afterwards, it's even just doing that reflection. What went well? Okay, next time, what could be next time? What could be better if? What are some ideas that may have come out of that you may have, or even some questions that you may have heading into that next iteration of that activity going forward. So having those check pack feedback, either self or with other people, it's it's worthwhile, and I think we tend to avoid that, because it's we avoid we'll have the if we do have that self-reflection, if we're not coming from that mindset of okay, being rational and calm, and this is and I'm doing this very balanced, and the way I'm making it sound like it's so easy, it's so perfect, right? But if you're coming from a place of fear, or you just feel that, well, I was never going to be able to do this anyhow. If there's any doubt or self-deprecation, it will manifest itself that way. It's so what is it that you're going in with? How clear are you on your ability, on the potential that you have, the skills? How well do you really recognize what it is that you are bringing to the table, and how much do you appreciate that and honor
That's
that?
so important. That is so important because as you were saying that, what really was coming to mind is, like you, I've worked with hundreds of clients, and there is one piece, one step that I call the Epic You story map that we create together. And first of all, it takes a lot of kind of mining the treasures on my part to help to extract some of the authentic passions and strengths and things that they do bring to the table. And when we complete this process, most people are very emotional because they realize that their microscope has been honed in so um, lopsidedly on all the things that they perceive are flaws or that they don't do well. There's always a big but. Anytime they give themselves credit, or this has been going well, but instead of this has been going well, so, right? And so I think that what I hear a lot, and again, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to think about this for a moment. Sometimes we associate self-reflection as self-criticism.
Mm.
And I would debate that no, we're really good at self-criticism. We do that all
Oh,
day
okay.
long.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
unless we discipline ourselves and learn that that actually isn't going to help us reach that optimal performance. When I'm working with people to help them achieve things that currently feel impossible, there is a tremendous focus on why do you think we're given this imagination? We're one of the only creatures, to our knowledge, on this planet that has the ability to imagine. Are we given this out of some sort of sadistic purpose so that we can fear, worry, self-doubt, torture ourselves? Or to your point, Jeffrey, the athlete, which for whatever reason we seem to only feel like we're going to use this in athletics, to envision the success, envision the potential, envision ourselves as this bigger, bolder selves, envision how the feeling of what success feels like when we inevitably achieve it so that we can get to that, electromagnetic match, that frequency that can allow us ultimately to experience it. So the reason I think when we started this, that I believe that self-reflection is your superpower, and the iteration that can come with that, the positive iteration, and maybe the reboot that needs to happen is self-reflection. When you really hone in on, what's working, okay, where might we be leaving some things on the table and have the potential to have even more? And therefore, what is the inspired action that this is leading me toward? And who am I? And how might I become that even bigger, bolder, more epic version? Empowered, purpose-driven, innovative, collaborative, and really give ourselves that turbocharge rather than buy into the belief that for some reason we are destined to walk around this planet as our own worst enemy. Well, if we don't commit to consistently having that kind of sovereignty, that self-discipline of thought that I had to have in order to go over the freaking lip of the abyss, of course we like resort to autopilot. And as I've said many times, at that point, it becomes like we walk out into the world as if we're walking into a casino, praying that the house lets us occasionally win. How does that resonate with you, Jeffrey?
Well, it does in so many levels. Meredith. It's it's we're I'm hearing it. It's feedback, right? And then really it's we're wired, like going back to like we're wired for feedback, and our brains, and we're talking about that fear element, or our brains are there to protect us, and so it will be there where the signals are saying this is danger, danger. Then you're going to hold back, but
Right.
then when you take time to reflect and take in the data and the feedback and say, hey, this was positive, this was a good, these are some elements, then it becomes less intimidating the next time you do it, the next iteration. So now the brain is saying, okay, there were some benefits from this. All right, well, no, we'll give you permission to do it again. Let's inquire again. And then, so you just create another feedback loop that now starts to reinforce that element of whether this is a good, bad, indifferent, but really just to orient ourselves that we're making that decision from a place of reflection, also just a healthier and with more data that we have. Like where we get into it's often it's that difference between what's the reality and what's the perceived reality,
Yes.
and the lived experience is the reality, it's a true reality of any situation. But how often are we basing decisions on our perceived reality of what could take place, what might take place, is possibly could take place, versus immersing ourselves into the situation and then living it, and then emerging with the response and information that we likely didn't have at this what we didn't have at the beginning of that.
So I love that too, because you use the word, what we experience is reality. And yet, to play with that concept a little bit, what we experience technically is just an experience. And so there is that one breath. We know our mind, to your point, is destined to make it mean something. Our mind is going to elect, what am I going to focus on and what am I going to make it mean? And therefore, what story am I going to create? What significance around that experience am I going to create? Now, it could be from my own experience, it could be actually from generational experiences. Aha, this is validation of that generational assumption, right? And I have found that, and if you're watching this, I would encourage you to experiment with this a little bit. When there is an experience around you. There is, and this is scientifically proven, that there is a moment when you have the opportunity, if you practice, a la having to go into a gym, again, there is an inner gym as well as that external gym. Take that moment of first saying, am I going to react or respond? Responding is choosing to realize that there is always a bigger picture. And what am I going to choose to focus on in this experience? And what am I going to choose to make this mean in this moment? What significance am I going to give it? And is there something that I might be assuming that is not necessarily true? And I think when you can start to approach the experiences around you a little more like a sleuth, like a treasure hunt, a scavenger hunt, assume that there are many, many different treasures and gems around you. And if you look at the most successful inventions, the most success stories, iteration is a fundamental ingredient. Even when a plane flies from its point of departure to its place of arrival, there is a flight plan. And yet, if there was no course correction along the way, the plane would not arrive at its destination. So, getting data that tells you that you need a slight iteration is not an indication or validation of failure or flaw or any of those things. Definitely not evidence of your lack of value or self-worth. Agree?
No, agreed, agreed, and it's hard to reach that point when we fall into comparing ourselves to others, be in our same situation. It's like, well, how come so and so was able to do it, or they do it, they make it look so effortlessly, and I had to struggle to get here. And we'll talk about the how we got to that end point, or the level of success, and but because we're comparing. Well, I did this much, and they did this little, and they got more. It's this constant relativism that we can get ourselves into. Is like, well, my success in relation to someone else it isn't as valid because this, that, and everything, and so it's bringing our just bring to the self of what what did this experience mean for you,
Mm-hmm.
and just bring it to that focal point. Let's just quiet the crowd, the noise around us. But what is this? How does this, uh, you know, signify movement or growth or progression, uh, you know, on your path to what you want to do or what's important to you in your life?
That's so, that's such an interesting point that you bring up. And so what this kind of triggers in me is, I will share with you and you who are listening that I remember sitting on the porch in South Carolina with a beloved aunt of mine when I was in my late 50s, I think. And so, granted, she's much older than I am by 20, 30 years. And she looks at me and she says, Meredith, you have had such a hard life. I don't know how you've done it. And I remember letting those words soak in and pondering them and juxtaposing them to a moment that I've shared on this podcast earlier, but of sitting in the chapel in between shifts as Skylar was in the ICU fighting for her life. And I'm sitting in one of the only quiet places I can find. And as I stared at that stained glass, just having this sudden realization that two things specifically in my life that had been impossible to forgive, much less feel grateful for, thank you very much. All of a sudden, in that moment, it was like, oh my gosh, I get it. I saw the gift and I saw the bizarre way that those most horrible experiences in my life had, in a way, fulfilled this much bigger ask. They had, in this warped way, been my given that I never would have given myself intentionally, that allowed me to be there as the mom that Sky needed me to be, as the human being that I needed to be in that moment with all the other ripple effects. And yet, to my aunt, looking at me from her life experience, her perspective, her story, my life had been really hard, which I guess technically it had been, and ask the earlier version of myself going through those two experiences. And I would have said that I was holding on by my fingernails and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. And yet, little did I realize that had life gypped me out of those anti-mentor experiences, I would not be sitting here today with the gifts far exceeding, life is better than the fairy tale in so many ways, even though they're definitely, I mean, I'm still Skylar's caregiver. She still isn't bounding back up the mountains of Peru. She, all of those things. And so, to your point of comparing yourself to others, I mean, thinking of Frodo in the middle of Lord of the Rings, I mean, if he was comparing, I mean, our story is our superhero story. And the sweetness, the deliciousness of our stories is that they are unique. And to your point, Jeffrey, of knowing what we bring to the table respectfully, in my humble experience, it's rarely the like, yay, the unicorns and the fairy princess parts of our life that create what we really bring to the table. It's those, again, Lord of the Moments, dragging this ring, dealing with the golem. It's like, the anti-mentors
Yeah.
that give us the opportunity. They don't force us to be that bigger, bolder version of ourselves, but they do give us the opportunity to push that bike over the edge and go down the abyss and experience the exhilaration of saying, Holy Toledo, otherwise what some people might call holy shit, I can't believe I did this. That wasn't who I was a moment ago. And discovering, oh my gosh, who knew that I could be me, right?
It's amazing, isn't that it's just allowing to for you to. I'm listening to you and I'm hearing you just reflect on those breakthrough moments in your life, and how though it's in the subtle, quiet moments of with family, with friends, just having that time just to be
Mhm.
you and not have to, not worrying about the doing, not worrying about the role. It's just, yeah, I'm just taking time just to reflect on who I am and what's important to me, and what I'm discovering about myself. Uh, and I think that's, I often, one of the practices I've taken up this past year, and but even starting late last year, I went through a hip replacement surgery. It gave me a chance to just to reflect on, okay, and heading into next year, like what is it that, who's the person I want to be. And because we can get like, oftentimes, it's this time of the year, it's, anytime you're talking about goals and setting goals, and it's all, very results oriented. That's the evidence of the plans that we've made, the strategies that we put in place. But in order to achieve those outcomes, we're making an assumption that, okay, well, this is the person, this is who I am. But who are you? And, well, who is the person you are required to be in order to achieve those outcomes? And
Mm.
are you, and how where are you of the skills, the talents, the experiences of what you have and what may be required in order for you to achieve those goals at the end of the year? And so it's just it's something that in a fast-paced world where we get so caught up, and it's easy to get caught up in just the everyday life,
Mm.
and to take that time just to pause. It seems, in some cases, it seems like a waste of time, or I don't have the time. But what does 5 minutes, or even what is 5 minutes? Yeah, just start at that. What a 5 minute break in your day, how can that contribute to the remainder of your day?
Yes, yes. And a couple of things that once again ignited within my brain, because you know how you ignite my brain, Jeffrey. One is that goals. And if you've listened to this podcast, watched it, you know, I believe we have one goal and one goal only. That said, in general, the typical use of the word goal, think about it. The experience of achieving that goal, that is typically a moment. Maybe like you're experiencing the exhilaration, hit that goal. Maybe that exhilaration, if you're lucky, lasts about 15 minutes, right? I mean, you're like, yeah, well, champagne, boom, the whole 9 yards. You are spending so much more time in the beingness and the process, so much more time. So, all too many people, when they set a goal, and here's my pet peeve with the terminology goal, is that we often are tempted to use that phrase, this is my goal. And then we become like the kids on the long road trip. We're in the back seat, and every time we wake up in the morning, we're like, oh, am I there yet? Are we there yet? Oh, I'm not there yet. And so it's that feeling of kind of not enoughness. There's a little less than in that because I will be all that. I will be happy. I will feel successful. I will feel confident when fill in the blank, I hit that specific goal. Well, what if the goal is kind of just like another opportunity, another objective, another thing to play with to ignite a journey that helps you discover more of who you are. Because this is the second thing that you brought up for me, Jeffrey, is that very familiar saying, you've probably heard it, of we are not human doings, we are human beings. So why do we forget that? It's really everything going on out here in the world is not an opportunity for other people to define us. It's for us to discover who we prefer or will choose in this moment that we have never lived before to show up being. And transformation is simply the decision, and it's as easy as making a different choice. So, no matter how much data, past proof you have of what has been true in the past, it is still a uniquely different collection of data than you had a year earlier because things have transpired. You have the opportunity slash choice in this moment, again, that you have never lived before, to say, not what am I going to choose to do right now? Who am I going to choose to show up being? And that will give you the inspiration to what you now are going to choose to show up doing. And keep in mind that in the doing, iteration must be a given. That means some things will work, some things beautiful will be a clue. Ah, that's getting cold. That's in the hot and cold game. You're getting colder. Beautiful. Now I know to turn this way. Fantastic. That means everything's working. And this just, let's play with it a little bit differently. So, Jeffrey, I always love these conversations
Well,
with
Meredith,
you.
thank you. It's yeah, I always enjoy your insights and revelations. It inspires me. I always enjoy walking away from this with a different perspective, and definitely it enlightens my day in so many ways.
So I'm still going to, even though I've asked you these questions before, I'm going to ask you them again in the spirit of we are not who we were even a day ago, right? We've had new experiences, new things to potentially process. So, first question, um, imagine that it is 100 years in the future, and for whatever reason, human beings, humankind, hopefully emphasis on kind, has lost access to a lot of the wisdom that would help them choose how to choose to live. So, on this opportunity, this day, this occasion, what are three things that you would say from where you stand today to as a kind of point of departure of how to choose to live?
Wow. Gee, 100 years from now too. It's I first it's really I think it starts with just uh, understanding what it is, who you are. I know it sounds like a very simple or generic, doesn't really say a lot, but who are you? And is that how, when someone asks you that question, how do you respond? And it doesn't have to represent anything in particular, but it's what's important to you. What do you value? And in your life, in terms of relationships, in terms of activity, in terms of accomplishments, career, it could be financial. They all you can go through the whole life wheel and choose what those elements, but really what that is, and also at the same time, what when do you document that? And we talk about journaling and dial or having a diary. I know some people who do that. I know I've started doing that this year as well, kind of getting back into that routine I used to do years ago, and it just gives it's kind of like charting a trip, that road trip where it's, you can reflect on some of the notes and the milestones and, some of those checkpoints along the way that just give you a chance to sit back and reflect. Okay, how far have I come? Um, when from the last time I checked what this journey was or the destination to which I was intending to reach, and so it's so I think I've is that one two I think so it's so first of all it's identify who you are, what's important to you, what do you value. Second one is taking time to document that, journal it register it somehow, even share it with someone else. Just have some type of repository or place that you can reference back and say, hey, okay, this is where I was. And mark those milestones. And I think the third is just to is also uh, being uh, being open to to feedback. So who are the people you're talking to? Who are the people that you're surrounding yourself with? And how are they contributing to your journey forward? And make note, they're going to change over your lifetime as you continue to change. It, but when you are often they say that you are the reflection of the five people that you spend most time with. So who are those? Who are your five that are influential on the direction that you're taking your life?
Mm, many words of wisdom there. I love that. So, second final question, Jeffrey, would be going back to the goals. I believe that we have one goal and one goal only, and that is to be taking that last breath, saying, oh my gosh, this was frickin' epic. And everything else along the way is an opportunity, the next finish line, something to play with, right? A new bike trail to blaze. So looking back at the life that you have already lived, what would you say are the things or is the thing that has helped you right now be able to say, in that way, mission accomplished?
Hmm. Wow, I don't know how to answer that question, Meredith. That's very. I would say to this point in time, uh, it would be looking back at it's just looking at taking time to see uh, what what I have done. And it's not so much in terms of personal accomplishments, but more so and often it's the people I run into, the more the youth that I used to, uncle or mentor to, and to see where they were when some of them when they were just running around in diapers, to now to see them as professionals, to see them, leading people, to take having places of not only career growth or personal growth or relationships in their lives, and just to know that in some shape or form I was a part of that formation journey and contributed to that, and many of them, all of them have acknowledged that in some shape or form to me. But it's to know that I've had that level of impact and influence in the lives of other people. For me, that I think that's really the proof that I enjoy as well.
Impact is invaluable. It's priceless, isn't it? Because that really, I think, to a certain extent, is what makes us eternal, if there is such a thing as being eternal. It's when our our message and who we are, which is an extension, of course, of many things that have come before us and have happened around us. And it is that Maya Angelou quote, while we're doing powerful quotes, of people don't necessarily remember you by what you do, it's how you made them feel, right? And so It's a very powerful response. So, final question, Jeffrey, is if you were to learn that that big boulder is coming at some point within the next 2 years, what would you dare to risk that perhaps you haven't yet even tackled that would maybe even feel a little bit bigger, a little bit bolder, a little bit more unfamiliar and uncomfortable? Who would you want to dare to be going forward in these next 2 years?
That's a great question, Meredith. It's funny enough. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine on the subject, and what he said to me bluntly is that you think too small, and it kind of caught me off guard. Again, feedback uh, from someone that I trusted, and I took that as a challenge as well. And I think it's living on a bigger in a bigger plane, being less conscious of what I say or how I present myself, and more and thinking less about myself and more about the people that can use and can benefit from what I have to offer, or helping other people reach that untapped, unlimited potential in a way that's going to lead to changes that will benefit them and also the people that they serve as well. And there's many opportunities I have to do that, and that's in the next 2 years. I would definitely see that's what I plan to do.
Woo! Well, I will come back and check in with you before then, and kudos to you for really putting that out in the light, because I will share with you that that is one of the common threads as I'm going back to the Epic You story map that is life changing for so many clients that I work with. And one of the big ahas is how, going back to the word uncomfortable, how uncomfortable it can be to be quote unquote forced or even asked to think big, what feels unrealistic, what feels like I don't know how I would achieve that. And this is where we discover a blind spot that we don't even know that we have about how we've been defining ourselves. And that goes back to the mountain bike. For I had defined myself for 50 plus years of my life as someone who would never do that and who just, never go down an abyss like that. I mean, come on, right? And so it doesn't matter how long you have been defining yourself within a very specific set of boundaries, there's always the potential to say, well, what if? And to say, maybe I am a risk taker if risk has the promise of being everything that I could have wished for and then some. If being a risk taker means that I'm everything that I want is not currently in my familiar experience, so that means it's in the unfamiliar. So if all I have to do is just get that one little first, like, point of no return. Here I go, whoosh, down the abyss. And then, oh my God, I'm going up the abyss. Oh my God, I did. Right. And then when I do that, the feeling of discovering something about yourself that for years, decades, you've told yourself is not in you is priceless. And for that moment, when it doesn't matter what anyone else in the world thinks about you, when you discover that you have an epicness within yourself and the only reason you want your parents or anybody else to validate it is because You're not sure you can trust yourself to see it. Well, if you can give yourself the opportunity where that epicness is undeniable for you to see, that one moment of exhilaration will be worth all the fear in the world to get there.
Mhm.
So, kudos to you, Jeffrey, for bringing that out.
Wow, wow! I felt like I was ready. I was going to say, "Preach, preach, Meredith, go, go, keep going." But it's if I as a final comment, I think the one of the threads throughout this conversation that really came to light, I think, and especially close to the end, is that it, it, there's there's no definition for what success really is when you really think about it, right? In terms of what it's supposed to look like. It's an outcome, but I think oftentimes we get caught up in the it has to be perfect. It has to be straight lined. It's and there's a lot. Hey, we look at the history of the world, and you mentioned about some of the inventions that we've had over our societies over time. There are many inventions and that have been simply the products of mistakes, and there's a lot of sloppy successes out there, and that people have been able to benefit from it and launch it and be recognized for. And so it's, part of it is, having the goal, having the outcome, but also recognize too that, there is the course correction that's going to happen. And there's going to be the pitfalls and the valleys and the rising tides that go with that too. And that's all part of the learning. It's the curiosity. It doesn't diminish the quality of the person you are. It's in many ways it's inviting a further exploration and expansion of the person that you are becoming.
Ooh, my turn to say preach, Jeffrey. So, oh my gosh, we always have so much fun. And thank you for watching this, and for playing along with us as we go along here. And Jeffrey, share with those of you who are listening, how can they connect with you? How can they stay in touch with you?
Well, it always you can always look me up on LinkedIn. I have a page there, and also in the process of actually redoing a website landing page, and I'll have more information and resources and updates on that as well. So stay tuned on that. But check me out on LinkedIn, and we'll definitely look forward to answering any questions and just say hi. And then always look forward to meeting new people.
Wonderful. And of course, Jeffrey is one of my regular guests because we have so many topics that we really love to explore. And it's the point counterpoint. We both have, so many different experiences, and we both love to really ponder that big question of how to choose to live so that whenever that boulder does drop, we can be one of the ones who say, oh my gosh, I hope I get to do this again someday. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do it with you. So, Jeffrey, I can't wait until our next conversation back here on the How to Choose to Live podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Happy New Year.
Mm. Thank you so much, Meredith. Always wonderful, and look forward to the next time.
Beautiful. And as you're watching this, if you found something that was igniting in a positive or a thoughtful way to you, I do hope that you'll also think of who else this might inspire, because as we were talking about, it's all about impact, and whatever is going out in the world around us, what we can control and do is who we are showing up being. And often it's easier to be the best version of ourselves, like Jeffrey pointed out, is when we surround ourselves with the influences, even when it has to be virtually, with things that kind of ignite that best version of ourselves, the epic version of ourselves. So please go ahead and subscribe and like this podcast. Leave us a comment. We would love to hear what you found were your aha moments, and share this with someone. Definitely stick around for the bonus tip at the end. And I hope you'll come back next week for my next guest here on the How to Choose to Live podcast. So, booyah! See you soon. Today's tip is all about establishing a new habit going forward that really embraces the critical value of that pause, the reflection, and that sometimes the reality truly is that you cannot move forward with impactful action if you haven't taken the time to pull that bow back, to take that time of reflection, to turn off all of your technologies, tell everyone around you to give you a reflective break. Maybe go out into nature, go out into some environment that's peaceful and calm, or simply go plug in with your earphones into some meditational music and get beyond the place where you're feeling like, I have to actively accomplish something. I have to take a look at what's working, what's not working, what should I do differently. Yes, that's part of the equation, and yet the most impactful part of the equation is often trusting that now is the time to simply pull back the bow and to start building that muscle that we often call the imagination, to allow your mind to go beyond the place where you have to know how you would accomplish this. And it may feel hard at first. I prefer to call it unfamiliar. And yes, it may feel unfamiliar because most of us have fallen out of the habit of giving ourselves permission to do that. So, however it shows up, I would encourage you today to embrace this mission, to discover what can the addition of regular pauses in between the chaos of your notes, how can that contribute powerfully to the overall harmony of work and life and creating this amazing story going forward? So I'm Meridith Alexander, CEO of Grit Mindset Academy. Go ahead and hit subscribe. Join us for our next episode on the How to Choose to Live podcast. And in the meantime, go out and discover what coming fully alive and being that most epic version of yourself truly means for you. See you soon. Booyah.